I want to start with the geography because the geography is what made everything that followed feel like it had been designed rather than accidental. The cabin sat on a small island in a lake in northern Minnesota, accessible only by a flat-bottomed aluminum boat the owner kept tied to a dock on the mainland side. You called him when you arrived at the parking area. He motored across and picked you up and your gear, took you over in 2 trips if you'd packed heavy, and left the boat tied to the island dock for the duration of your stay. When you were ready to leave, you motored yourself back. Simple, self-contained. The kind of setup that felt charming and adventurous when I read about it on the listing. And that felt very different when I woke up on the second morning and the boat was not where I had tied it the night before. I had been on that island alone for a day and a half. The lake was roughly a mile across at its widest point, the mainland visible as a dark line of trees through the morning mist, the parking area and the owner's property somewhere beyond that tree line, 40 minutes away by car, even after you'd crossed the water. No cell signal on the island. The owner had mentioned this during our brief phone call before I arrived. The way you mention a quirk of a property that's more feature than flaw depending on your perspective. He'd given me a handheld radio for emergencies, a short-range unit that he said would reach him if I needed anything. The radio was in the cabin. I'd used it once, the first evening, to let him know I'd arrived and gotten settled. He'd acknowledged, told me to enjoy the quiet, and signed off. I stood on the dock in the early morning light, looking at the empty water where the boat had been tied, and ran through the possibilities in a way that felt increasingly dishonest the further I went. I had tied that boat securely. I'd been a sailor in a previous chapter of my life, and tying a boat was something my hands did correctly without needing my attention. The knot I used didn't slip. It hadn't slipped in 20 years of using it. I went back inside and got the radio and called the owner. He answered after a long moment, his voice carrying the specific thickness of someone woken from sleep. I told him the boat was gone. Silence. Gone how? He said. I told him it wasn't at the dock. I checked both sides of the island in case it had drifted and caught somewhere along the shore. It wasn't anywhere visible from land. Another silence, longer than the first. He said he'd come across and take a look. He said it would be about an hour. I said fine and put the radio down and stood at the window looking out at the lake. The mist was lifting slowly. As it cleared, I could make out more of the far shoreline, the dock on the mainland side, the line of trees behind it. The boat was tied to the mainland dock. I picked the radio back up and told him I could see the boat from the island. It was on his side of the lake. The silence this time was the longest one yet. I didn't move it, he said. His voice had changed. Not dramatically. The specific quality of someone whose tone shifts when a situation has moved from inconvenient to something they don't have a word for yet. I asked him how it got there. He said he didn't know. He said he'd be there in 30 minutes. I sat in the cabin and looked at the water and thought about what it meant that the boat was on the far side of the lake. Someone had untied it from this dock, motored it across, and tied it to the other side. That required a person who had been on this island in the night, close enough to the dock to untie the boat, and had then used it to leave. I went through the cabin very carefully. I checked the small storage shed behind it. I walked the perimeter of the island, which took less than 10 minutes, looking at the shoreline for any sign of a second boat, a kayak, anything that would explain how someone arrived and then left without using the one boat we'd both known about? Nothing. The owner arrived 40 minutes after my second call. He crossed in the retrieved boat and tied it to the island dock and stepped onto the island looking like a man who hadn't fully woken up yet and was no longer sure that was going to happen. We walked the island together. He didn't say much. At the north end, where the trees came down to the water and the bank was soft, he stopped walking. Boot prints In the mud. A single set, coming from the water's edge and going back to it. Not from the dock. From the open shoreline, where there was no dock. Where you would have had to swim or arrive in something that wasn't the owner's boat. He looked at the prints for a long time. Then, he looked at me. "I want to offer you a full refund," he said. "And I'd like to take you back across right now." I didn't argue. I packed in 8 minutes, and we crossed in silence, and I drove home with wet boots from the mud at the water's edge, and a question I've never found a satisfying answer to. Someone came to that island in the night by a means I can't identify, untied the only boat, motored it to the far shore, and then either swam back or had a second way off the island that neither the owner nor I ever found. I have asked myself many times what they planned to do once they'd confirmed I had no way off. I'm glad I found out the boat was gone before they came back to remind me. I know the specific way it sounds before I've explained it, and I'm going to explain it anyway because the explanation is precise enough that the strangeness of it doesn't go away once you have it. I have a habit, when I stay somewhere unfamiliar, of photographing the interior when I arrive. Not for any particular reason that I'd ever articulated to myself, just a habit that started after I once left a pair of expensive headphones at a rental and couldn't prove to the host that they'd been there when I arrived. I photographed the rooms, the furniture positions, the layout of anything I might later need to prove I didn't disturb. Compulsive and slightly paranoid, but harmless. The cabin was on a lake in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, accessed by a dirt road that dead-ended at the property. No other structures visible in any direction. The nearest town 22 miles away. I was there for 5 nights alone, a working trip that required uninterrupted quiet, the kind I'd learned to find in remote rentals rather than trying to manufacture in my apartment. I photographed everything when I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. The main room, the kitchen, the 2 bedrooms, the layout of the furniture in each space, the couch, 3 chairs, a side table, a bookshelf, a dining table with 4 chairs around it. I noted the distance between the dining table and the front door, specifically because I nearly walked into the corner of it when I came in with my first load of bags. Close enough to the entrance to be inconvenient, close enough that I thought briefly about moving it and then decided against changing anything. Wednesday morning I woke up, made coffee, and noticed the dining table was closer to the door than it had been the night before. Not significantly. A few inches. The kind of difference that, if I hadn't photographed the room on arrival, and if I hadn't nearly walked into the table corner when I came in, I would have attributed to having moved it myself without remembering. I checked my arrival photo on my phone. The table had been further back. The distance between it and the door was measurably smaller than it had been Tuesday afternoon. I checked every window. Locked. The front door had been locked from the inside with a deadbolt when I woke up, the way I'd left it. No sign of entry. I moved the table back to where my photograph showed it had been and photographed everything again and went about my day, working, trying not to let the specific discomfort of what I'd noticed take up more mental space than I could afford to give it. Thursday morning, the table was closer to the door again. Same incremental shift, same few inches, as though it were being moved slowly and precisely rather than shoved. The couch had moved too. Not much. I only caught it because I'd photographed that wall the previous morning after the table incident. The couch was 6 inches closer to the door than it had been in Wednesday's photo. Everything in the room was, incrementally, closer to the exit. I checked every possible point of entry again. Every window locked from inside. Deadbolt engaged. No evidence of a key turning in the lock from outside, which I'd know from the position of the bolt. I called the owner. She asked if I wanted to cut the trip short. I said I'd think about it and hung up, which was a decision I've since reconsidered. Friday morning, I photographed the room before I got out of bed, using my phone from the sleeping position, wanting to capture whatever it was before I'd been upright and mobile for any length of time. Every piece of furniture in the main room had moved, closer to the door than it had been the night before. The dining table was now close enough to the entrance that you'd have to angle around it to get out. I left that morning without finishing my stay. I sent the owner my photographs, all of them in sequence, with timestamps. She went quiet for a long time in the way people go quiet when they're looking at something that doesn't have a comfortable explanation. She told me she'd never had a complaint like this before. I asked her if she'd ever had a complaint at all. She said the previous guest had left a day early and hadn't said why. I didn't ask anything else. I just drove. I still have all the photographs on my phone. I've shown them to 4 people who I trust to be precise and rational about what they're looking at. All 4 of them have given me explanations that fall apart under any real scrutiny. Settling foundations, vibration from the road, misremembering the original positions. None of those explanations account for timestamps. None of them account for the fact that every piece of furniture in the room moved in the same direction, toward the door, by roughly the same increment every single night I was there. I have never figured out what was moving them. I have never figured out what it was trying to tell me about the door. I think about it most often when I'm somewhere remote at night, and I hear a sound I can't immediately place. I'm going to tell you the straightforward facts first, and then tell you what I found out afterward, because that's the order in which I experienced them, and the order matters. The cabin was on a lake in the mountain country of northern Idaho, small enough that the owner described it in the listing as a private lake on private land, which I took to mean a pond or a reservoir of some kind, rather than anything notable. The access road was 11 miles of graded gravel that climbed steadily from the highway into forest that got progressively denser and darker the higher it went. I arrived on a Saturday evening in July, having driven most of the day, and the lake, when I saw it for the first time as the access road came over the final rise, was genuinely beautiful, clear, dark at the center from depth, ringed by forests that came down to the water on every side, except the small graveled area where the cabin sat. I got inside, unpacked, ate something, went to bed. I woke before dawn to a sound I couldn't immediately place. A low, sustained crackling that I registered as a fire before I was fully awake and then understood was coming from outside the cabin rather than from the stove inside it. I went to the window. The lake had frozen. I need to be clear about what I mean by this. Not iced over at the edges, not frost on the surface. Frozen solid from bank to bank. A flat gray-white surface that caught the pre-dawn light in the way ice catches it, with a specific opacity of something several inches thick rather than a skin of overnight frost. A lake that had been open dark water when I went to bed was now solid ice in July. I stood at that window for a long time. I went outside and walked to the edge of the frozen surface and crouched down and put my hand on it. Cold enough to sting immediately. I pressed my weight on it with my palm, and it held solid, thick. I found a loose stone and dropped it from waist height, and it didn't break through. It skidded across the surface and stopped in the middle of the lake. I had no cell signal, no radio, no way to contact anyone. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table and thought about what I was willing to accept as possible and what I wasn't. And I wasn't willing to accept this, which didn't change what I'd touched with my own hand. By mid-morning, the ice was still solid. I walked the perimeter of the lake looking for any explanation I hadn't yet considered. The inlet, where a stream fed the lake from the north, was also frozen. The small pool at its mouth iced over as completely as the main body of water. The temperature was not cold. Standing in the sun at 10 in the morning in July in Idaho, I was comfortable in a light jacket. The thermometer the owner had mounted on the cabin exterior read 58 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice does not form at 58 degrees. By mid-afternoon, the ice had begun to thaw, not dramatically, not all at once. The edges went first, a ring of dark water opening around the perimeter and widening toward the center over the course of several hours, the way ice thaws in spring. By evening, the lake was open water again, completely, the surface moving slightly in the wind with no evidence remaining that it had been frozen that morning. I stayed the full week because I am apparently someone who makes that decision. On the 5th day, I found the owner's name in the county property records using the listing information I'd saved, and from there I found an email address, and I wrote to him describing in precise detail what I'd witnessed on that first morning. He replied 4 days after I got home. Short email. He said the lake had a history in the local area. He said the previous owners had documented similar events going back to the 1800s. He said the County Historical Archive had a folder on the property if I was interested. I drove to that county seat 3 weeks later and read the folder. 11 documented accounts spanning 130 years, different owners, different guests, different decades. The same event described each time in different words, with the same core elements. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more true horror stories. If you have a real horror experience of your own, send it to my email. Your story could be featured in an upcoming episode of Hollow Diaries. Stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.